Hold on, wait for it.
Now you are, once you drop that bad boy in your pocket.
Never heard that before. First time for everything. That's right. Hey guys, my name is Adam. Little feedback there. I'm a kind of a loud, exciting guy. I know Microsoft, everyone's going, reading the topic going, I definitely don't work in marketing because that's got to be like the boringest topic ever. You were thinking, oh yeah, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to get a little nap time because this is like the boringest topic ever. So really the real reason why we do all of this, it's not to make our boss happy. It's not to make the CEO happy. Really, at the end of the day, what really happens is an auditor shows up, conducts an audit, bitches at your boss, who then turns around and bitches at you. And then you have lots of work to do. So ultimately, my talk really is how to make an auditor give you a hug. And there is nothing more exciting in life to feel the cold heart of an auditor next to your own. I mean, it's just a fabulous experience. I know all of you are thinking the real joke here, right? Rule number one, don't use Microsoft products. No, that's not the joke, but I'm sure all of you are thinking it. So before we do that, we're going to kind of be like doing the Jeopardy thing here. I want to show you some of the, as I've gone out to hundreds of different companies working on doing consulting and things like that, there seems to be common threads that I'm hearing in the market right now of problems that companies are having, common mistakes that people are making. So let me show you some of these common things that I'm hearing from companies. We have all these web apps, okay? So basically, you've got your CIO, and he's telling you, let's put this on the cloud. Let's use a software as a service. Now, the problem with all these software as a service is the big trend we're seeing now is that they all want to tie to Active Directory. So you look at things like Salesforce.com, Box, they all can integrate into Active Directory. There's lots of different ways to integrate into Active Directory, but they want to pull data from Active Directory. This creates some issues, okay? So the question is you have all these apps, and right now the average IT department is spending almost an hour per new user to provision. It takes them an hour to go create all these accounts and then create up their AD account. All of a sudden, it's taken your help desk lots of time and money to be able to provision these. And then on the flip side, when someone leaves the company, all of a sudden, I got to turn off their access. I got to turn off all these access. And that's while they can still log into all these apps. So how can I make it? The biggest problem is how do I figure out how to deprovision all these apps? Okay? And this is painful, okay? So all of a sudden, these attributes that are stored in Active Directory have become really important. Is this an active employee? What's his address? What's his email address? What's his phone number? As we have more software as a service applications using attributes in Active Directory just became a lot more important. So the validity of attributes is now exponentially more important than it's ever been. So let's take a look at this. There's a common thread here. Where do you think you find the most authoritative source for what your name is? Is it an AD? No, it never is. It really is in the HR system. If I really want to know when someone's hire date was, do I look at in AD? No. The source of truth is in an HR system. If I want to find out what someone's phone number is, should I look in AD? No. The most authoritative source for that attribute is not in Active Directory. It's in the telephone system. Okay? So one of the big challenges that you're facing today is how do we figure out exactly what attributes need to go into Active Directory, and then exactly how do we pump it in, and how do we replicate that information? So one of the crazy ways that companies do is, well, I can make my phone system talk to my email system, and I could make my phone system talk to my HR system. Now, this is just way too complicated. So the trend that you're seeing in the industry today is that the data is all flowing in Active Directory. So your phone will actually flow into Active Directory, and then the trend that I'm seeing now is that I push that phone number up to the HR system. So now HR system has the most accurate information. It just flows through a single point. So the data, the attributes here, they don't live there. That's not where they're living, but that's where we're going to sync everything to. So figuring out how to create those attributes, and how do you create these links, okay? So I've done it lots of different ways. I've done it through scripts. So basically, I'll have my HR system do a nightly CSV dump, and then I'll create a script that eats that CSV file and then sucks it into Active Directory. So it parses through, finds any new employees, finds any terminated employees, and then populates that information into Active Directory. Also, there's a lot of other third-party tools. Microsoft, I'm sure that they want to sell you something as well that's very expensive, that all handle this huge challenge we face today of figuring out how to push those attributes around. Another big issue is, okay, so we talked about before, we have all these different web applications. So what I'm being asked from a lot of different places is single sign-on. I want to be able to log into one place and have access to all my applications, okay? And the way that we can integrate is three ways, okay? So the first way is applications commonly now can talk straight into via Active Directory. They can talk LDAP. That's one way, okay? So you link up your application directly, and it talks directly to Active Directory. The second way, okay? Let's say my McAfee, well, what's a better example? Okay, my Taleo system or my Basecamp or Jasper, they don't offer a direct integration, okay? So what my portal does here that I'm using is it will inject the username, the user's username, and it injects the password as well. And what I do is I have a third-party, I have a plugin that I plug into the browser that will inject the username and password into that website. And the beauty is that I have my help desk create the username and password and put that into this single sign-on system. The user never sees the actual username and password. And the way that I guarantee that they don't ever is all these applications that are using password injection, I'm using a 25-character randomly generated password so that the user never sees that password. So that way, if I cut access, so what they do is they just log into this portal with their Active Directory credentials. So all you need to do to turn off access to all those applications is turn off their AD account. If they can't log into this site, they can't log into any of the other apps. So now I have overcome that provisioning, deprovisioning problem of how do I turn off access to 50 different software as a service applications with one single click. So the last way that we do integration is through federation. It's gaining the most steam. You're seeing a lot of companies supporting federation. So what it really is federation? What are these magical words? I'm sorry, I was supposed to go federation. Now, what are these words that we hear about? OAuth, SAML, WSFed. All they really are standards that are used to pass authentication. So they all kind of work the same way, okay? So we'll start with step number 1 here. User goes to salesforce.com, tries to log in. Salesforce.com knows that they're a user from my company, so they redirect me to my federated server. Whether this is an Active Direct ADFS server, or if this server is from Ping Identity or Okta or whatever their provider is. Then that server talks to Active Directory. So the user logs in, it passes that login request to Active Directory. Active Directory says, yes, that's a valid user, okay. For this attribute, we're gonna issue that user a token, okay? And I can specify in federation, I can specify and say, take these specific attributes from Active Directory and stamp them on the token. So now the user has this token, which he then presents to Salesforce. Salesforce sees that token and says, hey, here's a list of Active Directory groups that this person is members of. So I'm going to authorize this person's Salesforce.com experience based on AD group membership. So now you've just seen that Active Directory, your Active Directory groups just became way more important. So it's a lot more important now that you keep Active Directory up to date and current with very current live information. Typically, your organizations have information lag in their Active Directories. Their HR system lags their Active Directory system by 2 or 3 months in some cases. So the more that we use federation, the more we see that we have to keep this current with the attributes. Another thing that I'm seeing, hold on, I need a caffeinated moment. The other trend we're seeing is that the old way that we used to do file security is broken. The problem that we have with the old way that we used to do file security was, okay, I'm going to create a file share here. I'm going to set some file permissions and everything. But what happens if a user moves that file that contains customer data to another file share or to another folder location? Your security just got owned. Or it got owned just by moving the file. This is the wrong way to do file security. So your identity access management system has to support the new way that companies are pushing towards for doing identity management with files. And the way they do is they use content-aware security. Okay, so I go to save a file on my file server. What happens first is my file server opens up the file and says, hey, there's a credit card number in this document, in this text file. Or it goes through a PDF file and says, hey, there's some HIPAA data in here. It then stamps that file with meta information, and it stamps the file and says, So now the file is stamped saying, this document now contains PII, or social security numbers, or HIPAA data. So now I can go into Active Directory, and I can say, only these 6 people in the entire company can open any file that contains HIPAA information. So basically, Microsoft uses this data classification tool. This is one of the coolest features in Windows 2012. It's like pretty much the only reason that companies are upgrading to 2012 is for this data classification feature that's built into Active Directory. In the past, I was recommending companies use products like Varonis or StealthBits, which were very expensive. But now this is built in. So basically, as you can see here, I'm using Regex Expressions. So the file is opened up. These Regex expressions are looking for certain values. If it flags that, it now is stamping that file with that particular tag. And this tag here, where'd it go? So it's tagging that file. So now, if you were to right-click on that file now and go into Properties, you see this new tab. This new tab says Classification, okay? And so now I can dynamically, in this example here, it's identifying what country a particular file has, okay? So now I could restrict to say, only people in finance that work at the Egyptian branch are able to open this document. And I can actually go into Active Directory and I can specify that. Now, for me to be able to go to an auditor and say, in my entire organization, here is the location of every single credit card and every file that contains a social security number. Do you know what an auditor does when you hand them this report and tell them that I know the location of every credit card in the entire network? It like blows their mind. It's like, here you go. This is where it's all at. And this is what happens. You get hugs from auditors. And we were talking about the awkward hug in the last presentation. Yes, auditors give awkward hugs. But information security directors, they don't give hugs. So they just kind of go, good job. That's all you're going to get from a director. But auditors usually hug. Once you have that meta information stamped on a file, you can use that information for other purposes as well. So for example, whenever I have a file that's stamped with PII, with credit card, I automatically encrypt it. I have rules now that set triggers that say, automatically encrypt any file that contains a social security number. It encrypts it. One of the other problems I face is you have different regulatory standards around and compliance around different kinds of data. So HIPAA might say, this data here needs to be retained for 7 years. But this data over here is PCI data. So I need to keep it for 40 years. So now, when I'm doing backups and I'm doing data retention rules, I'm using that metadata about every file to determine its entire longevity of the data. The system now decides when I should purge that data out of the system based on these retention rules that are based upon the actual content of the actual files. PKI is now a huge thing. We're seeing MDM. We're seeing BYOD. A lot of the solutions for these devices use device certificates. And now, you're using user certificates now. So PKI now I include as part of my identity management system. I've seen huge problems with this. Huge problems. We'll talk about this in Act 2. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the common mistakes. Now that you kind of have a sense of of what I'm getting whipped from upper management of what they're wanting to see. Let me talk about when you're coming up solutions for these, things that I'm seeing problems implementing. We talked about the first one. This is mistake 1A because mistake 1 was really don't use Microsoft products. So not keeping AD up to date with the most current information, huge, okay? So figure out a way to resolve that problem, to make it so that the data in your attributes in AD are current. Okay, this next slide is very controversial. Be prepared to take your shoe off and start throwing it at me because I get a lot of resistance on this one. This is huge, okay? So basically what we're seeing is you have this identity management system, okay? You have, which is used by all your Microsoft guys, okay? And then you have the Linux guys. They'll spin up their own thing, or they'll just use local system accounts on all their Linux devices. And then you got the network guys that have their own account management system that they use for their own network devices. So all their Cisco devices, they're trying to maintain their own users. There's no way to centrally control when a user is terminated that you can kill all their access at once. This is why you need a unified system so that you can push one button and all of their access is terminated. I know, this is like really whoa. So from an information security standpoint, I love centrally managing all my architecture through Active Directory. Now this includes even, I like to use third-party products that allow me to apply group policy settings to Linux devices and Mac devices. So I'm now managing an Active Directory via group policy, every device in my company. I haven't seen Cisco products done really well, but Linux and Macs, they do really well using third-party rules. Yes, that is correct. Likewise is another great product. So, yeah, you're correct. But as I want to create, my job as an architect is to create an architecture that is device agnostic. I want to be able, from a single pane of glass, to be able to manage my MDM products, my iPads. It's one of the problems I have with Microsoft's SCCM is it doesn't keep up with the reality of what's really occurring in business. It doesn't give me the ability to manage all these other different products. Now, you have to convince your Linux admins and your network admins that you've architected your Active Directory in a way that domain admins cannot jump onto Cisco devices. So you need to apply security so that domain admins don't have full access to everywhere in Active Directory. You do this by advanced security. You go into the advanced security tab in Active Directory users and computers, affectionately called ADUC. The other tool that I use extensively is DSACLs. So I'm putting ACLs on OUs in Active Directory. And I'm saying domain admins is no longer able to have full control. So that way the Linux guys, they can control who has access to their Cisco devices. So I do. So I create, that's coming. Hold on. It's coming. Okay, mistake number 3. So I'm starting to rely on groups memberships for access into these software as a services. Okay, so as I rely more on these AD groups, it's more essential that I keep these updated and current. So I have a script that runs nightly, okay? So what this says is, based on this person's, so I have the HR system telling my AD system what cost center that person is. So now when I look in the Active Directory under cost center, I see that this person now is cost center 400, okay? So every night I now run a script that removes all the members of the accounting group, okay? And then it populates the accounting group with any person with a cost center of 400. So that way, if an employee leaves the accounting group, goes works for legal, that very next day, they no longer have this lingering access of still having full access to all the accounting data. So dynamically building your groups.
Why would you remove everybody and repopulate it? Because if you've got a large AD infrastructure or you're across multiple sites, you're going to get lag delay on your replication. Why not just remove the users that are not supposed to be there and leave your group intact?
You can do it that way. So you can do it, both ways work. The more important point here is having a dynamic system that keeps group membership up to date. Because a lot of problems that I'm seeing is that people don't keep their groups up to date. And are you seeing that too?
We don't see that right now with where I'm at, but again, I manage the AD, so
yeah.
I pull from where I'm at, I pull from our corporate enterprise directory on a daily basis and then go back through and parse data back into my AD, which is a separate standalone from our corporate.
Yep.
And then based upon what access reviews have been done previously, say, okay, these users I'm removing from group, these users are staying, and these users are terminated and disabled the account.
I think as a rule of thumb, though, it's easy to say that it's easy to grant people access because they know when they don't have it. But when they don't need it anymore, they don't raise their hand and say,
no.
I knew. And so that's where the dynamic has to come in, is you have to be able to identify dynamically when it naturally changes on this account, what's the trigger that's going to say, he no longer needs this access. Now, what I do is we have workflows.
Yes.
And so you got to have some type of notification that the manager that he's now under, because that's a new change, the manager needs to approve that change, and then by doing that, that needs to trigger he no longer needs his old access.
Yeah, there's 100 ways to do this, but the important topic, though, is that we keep our groups up to date. And I have just not seen it done very well whenever it's a manual process. If it's manually done traditionally, I have not traditionally seen it done really well unless you have some type of formalized process like you were talking about. Okay, so come back to your question you had before, okay? One of the big problems I have is that people have a single account in Active Directory, okay? So everyone that sits in your help desk or all of your domain admins, so your domain admins are logging into their local computer as domain admin. And so when their box gets compromised with a virus, oh my gosh, it is ugly. I mean, it's seriously ugly. Because now that user, the context of the user that's logged in now is domain admin.
The best thing to do as a pen tester is to go in on the network and just do hash replay attacks and just find those guys that are logging into domain admins all day long.
Absolutely.
Play their hashes and throw an admin account on their AD. They'll immediately say, okay, that I get, maybe we should create.
Separate accounts.
Anybody can do replay attacks.
Anyone. And so having an elevated account, so I have a separate elevated account for just domain admins, okay? The domain admin only uses that account when he has to do very specific things that he can't do with a regular elevated account. So that the less you have people actually using domain admins, really a pen tester hates. Because it's hard for him to see, you don't see the hash anymore on the network, so I can't replay it anymore. Curses. Another common problem that I commonly see in people's networks is Active Directory has these roles, okay, that only one one domain controller in the entire organization can have, okay, in the entire domain. Microsoft needs to be shot. They call them FSMO roles, which is just weird. But understand that there's this role of the primary domain controller. Now, he is the source of truth when it comes to time. And when I see time inconsistency of problems that occur across the network, I'm seeing just inconsistent things like random logins failing. Kerberos tickets get screwed up when time gets screwed up. So you cannot have the primary domain controller point to itself for the source of time, okay? He needs to be pointed to another time server. And you can't, there's just not an easy way to do that. Most people don't realize that you have to go into 7 different registry keys to change these settings. So anytime you change that PDC role, you got to remember to follow this Microsoft KB article to change all those registry keys. I've seen this cause a lot of Kerberos issues. Okay, so there's a common misconception since we're using PKI more and more and more. We're rolling out our own Microsoft internal certificate services. There's this misconception that the most important part of a PKI is the certificate server. It's not. And the reason why it's not is a user, he goes to use an application that relies on a certificate that was issued from that certificate server. Then what that application, what the user does is it checks the certificate replication list or the online certificate status protocol to see, is that certificate still valid, okay? If this fails, if he can't validate that certificate is still current, the application often fails. I've seen a lot of internal apps fail. So what's more important when you build an internal Microsoft PKI is that this CRL location is always available and that you should always separate that from the certificate server. So you have a certificate server, you should not have this CRL location, or you should not run OCSP on the same server. You always need to decouple those roles. So that way one can live without the other. And so that way if the certificate server does go down, the only thing that happens is you can't issue new certificates. No big deal, usually. Okay, another thing is, a common thing that I'm seeing is that organizations are starting to trust each other, internal CA providers. So I can trust another root provider, okay? And often, another thing that I have seen is that for email certificates, I can go up to like Baltimore Security and say, I'm going to pay you a grundle of money, and you're now going to trust my internal certificate authority so that when my users send out email using email certificates generated from my server, they're now trusted because Baltimore Security is in everyone's browser. So, but in order to play by those rules, in order to even have that possibility to do that, you have to use an organizational ID that's issued. When you just randomly install certificate service, it randomly generates an OID number. And the biggest problem in certificate services is there's so many settings in certificate services that are do-overs. You don't get second chances in certificate services. It's not like Active Directory. If you screw something up, I can rename the domain. There is so many things in PKI that the only way to fix is to throw out your PKI and start over again. So take the 2 minutes it takes to go get an organizational ID for Maena. It literally just takes 2 minutes to fill this out. And then when you install your certificate services, you install the certificate service with that new OID number. Another common problem I see is that as groups become more and more prevalent, you know, I'm seeing these SaaS things, I'm seeing companies create more and more and more groups. The problem is that when you use more groups, you have a Kerberos ticket, okay? And stamped on that ticket is all your group memberships. And if you have a lot of nested groups, it has to stamp those more and more and more on the certificate. Now, out of the box, Microsoft only supports a 10K authentication token size. So if you have too many groups stamped on that Kerberos token, well, your Kerberos token just stopped working. So you need to monitor that size. And there's things that you can do if you go over that 10K that allows you to go up to 40K, but you need to follow this Microsoft KB article to be able to support that. There's not a hard number on the number of groups because it depends on how deep they're nested.
My rule of thumb, when I put down was 256. Once you have more than that, you wouldn't fail, you would start dropping groups. You couldn't tell which order they come in. You have like the first 180, and the first 250, but the cooldown could be above that. And also, depends how long, it's actually the bit size is what you're after. So if you have a super long name length, it changes how many groups you get in as well.
Yeah, because it's the size of the token. It's a token limit size.
And so it's a big problem when you do Unix to AD migrations because
You have huge names.
you have, and you know it's broken when you look to authenticate against the group and the group doesn't show up.
Or you try to use integrated authentication mode, like in Internet Explorer, and it just fails, just chokes. So you actually have to make a setting on the actual server side and on the client side.
So a quick way to fix it is exactly what he's saying here, is don't use nested groups. That really increases, but that's like,
Well, if you're creating a new domain, I would just say roll it out of the gate, supporting 40K. So these are just things that you need to think of when you're architecting your solutions. Now, as Active Directory becomes more and more important, I'm seeing consistent problems in regards to monitoring your Active Directory and not keeping it healthy. Okay, so I kind of have this cookbook of simple things that every Active Directory administrator needs to do once a month. They have to do it once a month. They don't do it once a month. Oh, the problem is a lot of AD admins, they went next, finish, installed. 2 years later, AD is still running. Great. But as you start leveraging Active Directory more and more, all of a sudden they start seeing issues. So you need to start giving a little bit more love to it. Now everyone knows about DC-diag. Do the E-switch so that you can see the entire enterprise. Nothing new there. DC-diag does not cover everything. It is not the one-all be-all tool. I have seen DC-diag say, oh, everything's dandy. It's not. You need to run some of these other commands. This command here checks your replication. Make sure that your replication between your domain controllers is healthy. Microsoft actually issued a new tool that you can download from their site that I think it's a lot nicer. It's a nice GUI tool to check. You can get this from the Microsoft site. It's called the AD Replication Status Tool. And it's a nice little GUI interface. It's nice little pretty. The way that the way that Active Directory replicates to each other uses an engine called DFS. So DFS, we use DFS for other things, especially for file namespaces, things like that. So if your Active Directory is using DFS, if your Active AD is using DFS to replicate, you need to make sure that DFS is healthy. I've often seen problems with replication that were caused by DFS. They're DFS problems, not AD problems. So you need to make sure you monitor your DFS. I go to companies all the time, and I start going through their structure. They're having users that are just taking like literally over 10 minutes to log in. I start jumping into their Active Directory, and I'm finding domains that don't exist anymore, domain controllers that weren't removed correctly. Make sure that you go through, this is the best guide that I have found so far to be able to go through your Active Directory, because you need to open an ADSI. I know your feet are just, ADSI, it makes everyone nervous, but you need to go through ADSI, make sure that everything's cleaned up. You need to go through DNS, make sure DNS is cleaned up. Common other problem. People forget that they need to put subnets in. So basically, what an SRV record is in DNS, it says, okay, who's my Kerberos server? Okay, so for this particular subnet, who's my Kerberos server for that subnet? That's an SRV record, okay? So if I haven't defined subnets and I haven't defined sites, all of a sudden you have people in Germany logging into the servers in India, and it takes forever to log in. That can be the root cause of a lot of your slow login problems. Like we talked about before, this is actually in DNS. So you can see all of these little things with underscore. Those are usually referencing SRV records. You actually want to make sure you actually double click all the way through, validate that all of your SRV records are current. When you run DC promo to remove an Active Directory controller from your domain, oftentimes it does not cleanly remove all the records out of DNS. Number 9. Oh my gosh. How many people have seen, I've been to organizations and they're help desk people. They have like 30 people of domain administrators. This is like a company that it's like 500 people, and they have 30 domain admins? What I call it, and I'm like, why do you guys need 30 domain admins? So they're like, well, how do we administrate groups without logging into a domain controller? I'm like, really? Really? There's a way that you can administrate users without logging into a domain controller. It's called remote server administration tools. Make your help desk people use these tools. Don't allow them to log into domain controllers. Kicking them out. Large organizations that I've seen of 20, 30,000 employees have 2 or 3 domain admins company-wide, because they're delegating rights to particular admins instead of using domain administrators, this carte blanche super user. Another way that you can easily fix this problem of users logging into servers to administrate users is don't give them a GUI. So if you install Windows Server Core, look, there's no GUI. I've gotten a panic phone call from an administrator once saying, I'm out of this branch and I think we've been hacked. All the icons gone, or Internet Explorer's gone, everything's gone. I says, yeah, you shouldn't be logging into a domain controller. Thanks. My evil plan worked. Another common problem I see. Your Schema Admins group, okay? So this group down here, the Schema Admins group, should always be empty. No one should ever be a member of Schema Admins, except when you're actually making a schema change. So that way, if your domain admin happens to get a virus, that infected user can't go make schema changes and pollute your entire directory. Having Schema Admins empty really helps maintain your integrity of your schema. Okay, my New Year's resolution this year was to become more popular and have more friends. I want to have 100 new meaningful LinkedIn connections. So basically, I suggest people that we here in this community here, we need to be more actively engaged with each other. So if I'm seeing an issue in Active Directory, I want to talk to you guys that have seen these issues. So if you ask me to be a friend in LinkedIn, and I get stumped on an issue, or you get stumped on an issue, please reach out to me. Please. Please, I want to build this network of meaningful contacts that I can bounce ideas off of. That's all I have. 7 minutes early. Any questions? I don't think so. I just gave you 7 minutes of your life back. Thanks, guys.